Mr. Khaled Dawood, who is the managing editor of Al Ahram weekly newspaper, speaking to us from Cairo. So Iran has hit, Israel rather, has hit Iran's nuclear facilities. They've taken out military personnel. But do we know how much damage Israel's actually done yet?
Well, obviously, Mark, the damage is extremely extensive. I mean, it's not just any military personnel that they have targeted. They have targeted all the top military leaders of the Iranian army, plus dealing very heavy blows to some of the key nuclear facilities that the Iranians are known to have, at least the ones above the ground, namely the one in Natanz. And then, of course, the degree of infiltration within Iran itself is tremendous. As you know, the Israelis have released a video of the Mossad agents acting inside Iran, installing the missiles and launching the drones that were used to attack the Iranian air defenses, as well as the Iranian installations, and the assassination of some of the top Iranian scientists who work in that field. So, of course, it's a very drastic blow, and it is actually strange that the Iranians, despite the fact that it was pretty well known in the past few days at least that there was serious preparation for the Israeli military attack through statements made by President Trump and the other U.S. top officials, that the Iranians did not take precautions, at least to protect those assets and to protect their top scientists, considering the history of Israel attacking top nuclear scientists before. So, I mean, I'm sure the Iranians are still trying to absorb that massive strike and assess the damages. And at the same time, of course, the more difficult mission is to decide how they are going to react to this wide-scale Israeli attacks all over Iranian sites.
Well, let's come on to that, because they've retaliated of sorts. They sent 100 drones towards Israel, all of which seem to have been intercepted. They've held back their ballistic missiles. Do you think they're biding their time now to see how they should respond and how they should retaliate with force?
Certainly, they are assessing that, and what I've heard from some military experts, and that those drones cannot really be considered to be part of the response. It was like mostly a mission to explore the existence of Israeli air defenses and the interceptors, but definitely it's the retaliation to such wide-scale, humiliating attack to the Iranian side is not going to be limited to those drones. But at the same time, of course, there is the major threshold that the Iranians will have to think very carefully before crossing that in case they decide to carry out a massive attack with missiles against Israel, that this might push the Americans to get directly involved in this war. Of course, it was very worth noting the tweet that the American president made this morning, basically confessing that this entire Israeli attack was coordinated with the American side, and he's warning that the Americans provide the most advanced weapons to the Israeli side, and that they can still expect even worse in the coming days if the Iranians did not compromise and agree to a new nuclear deal with the American side. So, of course, it's now going to be up to the Iranians to decide the extent of their response and whether they want to really go very harsh in a manner that would push the United States to become a direct party in this war.
Now, Egypt, of course, has called for de-escalation. Germany's called for de-escalation. The British Prime Minister, Keir Starmer, held a phone call with Benjamin Netanyahu and also supposedly called for a de-escalation. Netanyahu's not going to listen to anyone, is he?
Certainly, the only party that he's going to listen to is the U.S. President Donald Trump. I mean, and apparently the whole world has been duped over the past few weeks about the growing gap between U.S. President Donald Trump and the Israeli Prime Minister, and the two sides do not see eye to eye. And then again, according to the Axios report, which was published today, a few hours after the attack, that the Israelis have been planning this attack for almost 8 months. Sorry, and at the time, U.S. President Donald Trump said he cannot tell whether the attack was imminent or not. Actually, the two sides, President Trump and Netanyahu, were holding a phone call on Monday to coordinate the last-minute details about the attack that the Israelis plan to launch against the Iranian side. So, of course, this is kind of a very important factor, because some are even warning, Mark, that the Iranians, or at least the hardliners within Iran, might even go as far as considering attacking American military installations in the Gulf region itself. But that certainly will be turning the region into the threshold of a major military clash that will involve certainly the United States. And I'm not sure that the key regional powers, including Egypt, of course, Saudi Arabia, Qatar, the United Arab Emirates, they want to see this kind of massive escalation. So, I mean, my expectation, which might not necessarily be correct, is that all those countries in the region will try to mitigate between the Iranians and the Americans, not to escalate further the situation, and to try to limit at the same time the Iranian response, so that the region doesn't disintegrate into total chaos, considering, of course, that the American president has been saying since he took office that he wants to be a peacemaker, that he wants to basically allow prosperity in the region through the economic deals he made through his recent tour. But obviously, Mark, maybe the American and the Israeli assessment is that this massive Israeli strike and the huge Iranian losses might pressure the Iranians to reach some sort of a new agreement instead of choosing escalation. So we're all waiting, the whole world is waiting for the extent of the Iranian response to this massive Israeli attack that took place this morning.
Well, there were meant to be talks between Iran and the US this weekend. Trump said a little while ago, he spoke to the media, he spoke to them and said that he's not sure whether they will take place. If this attack, as you mentioned, was coordinated with the United States, is there any chance that these talks will take place at all?
I don't think so. Obviously, the Iranians, Mark, will consider this announcement by Witkoff and the declaration that there are going to be talks on Sunday mediated by Oman as part of the deception campaign. Because again, I mean, if you go back to the Axios report, and usually their reports are accurate, I mean, the Americans actually gave the Israelis the green light to attack Iran, that there was this agreement that in public the Americans would say that they don't want to see an attack, as we've heard from Trump ourselves, that he doesn't want to see attack while the negotiations were ongoing. But today we hear a totally different story, which is that the American president has given the Iranians a deadline of 60 days to reach an agreement, which was reported in the press. Actually, well, at the time the opening of the talks were announced, but nobody actually expected that they're going to be 60 days short, after which the Americans will give the Israelis the green light to carry out such an attack. So again, if we put the puzzle, the parts together, we're going to be finding that the Americans certainly approve. And we have just heard the statement from Trump saying that the Israeli attack against Israel today was a great, actually, action from his point of view. So probably the Americans are sending a warning to the Iranians that if you did not come back to the negotiating table, not necessarily, of course, on Sunday, that I think is a deadline nobody's going to meet, but at least if they don't come back to the negotiating table, they might expect the worst. And if you might remember, Mark, actually the Iranians, they suffered another major loss back in 2020 when the Trump, at that time during his first term in office, assassinated the top leader of the Revolutionary Guards, Qasem Soleimani. And at that time, everybody thought that the Iranians will turn the world upside down, especially considering the status of Qasem Soleimani. But actually what happened was that the Iranians gave a heads up to the Americans that they're going to target some military bases in Iraq, and that attack caused some minimum damage and few injuries to the American soldiers, and that was it. So, I mean, are we going to see a repetition of that same scenario again? Of course, it's all up in the air until today.
Well, we'll see if the Iranians are going to be as pragmatic again this time. Thank you very much for joining us here on Q News. Khaled Dawood, the managing editor of Al Ahram weekly newspaper, joining us from Cairo.